College-educated voters are ruining American politics. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, that's the headline in The Atlantic on a column by, I'm not going to pronounce this guy's name right, but his first name is Eitan or Atn, I don't know, Eitan Hersh, January 20th in The Atlantic. And his thesis, he's an associate professor of political science from Tufts University. And basically, he's saying that mostly white, college-educated, political hobbyists are ruining American politics because while they do a lot of consuming news and talking about news, they do very little of any value. He specifically is targeting college-educated whites that he says are predominantly Democrats. And he has an interesting thing. He did a survey in 2018, and he said that white people who are interested in politics read, talk, and think, while blacks and Latinos were twice as likely to say they actually spent some time volunteering, and hobbyists, as he calls them, spend about 2% of their political time in actual activity of some sort of volunteering. 41% of their time is spent on news consumption, 26% on discussion and debate, and 21% thinking about politics all by their lonesome. Bill, what he's clearly upset about is because Professor Hersh sees politics as a way of engaging in power or of empowering others. And he said these political hobbyists are just sitting around talking about stuff and not really making a difference. First of all, do you think that's something that liberal Democrats think of themselves? Like, do they realize they're doing this, or would this be shocking news to them?
I don't know how to answer that question, so I'll just ignore it. But to the larger issue, this is just another flag out in the ground. It's telling me that this entire progressive movement is collapsing in front of our eyes. That doesn't mean there's not hard times to come, and it doesn't mean that that we're automatically going to be successful in restoring a great deal of common sense to this country. But nevertheless, it's just collapsing in front of my eyes and yours and everybody else who cares to look. I remember just reading yesterday about a woman this story has been told so many times it's not even news anymore. But a pretty radical feminist being uninvited to speak at a college event because she was transphobic by saying that if you just wishing you were a woman is not the same thing as biologically being one. This is a big left-wing lecturer who was disinvited. And the reason she was invited was because to preserve academic freedom.
She was disinvited to preserve academic freedom. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what the university claimed. In order to preserve academic freedom, the speaker was denied a chance to speak because some people might be upset at what she might say. And so as this situation becomes more and more ridiculous, and as the country in general becomes more and more just, the amount, the reach that you have to have in order to find something that looks like injustice has to grow larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. You know, we used to talk about people voting or not voting. Now, the big brains are discussing how much time you think about politics versus how much time you actually commit to politics. In Hollywood, we would say that this is a high-class problem.
Well, and actually, he makes that argument, Bill. What he says is, there was a great quote in here. I should dig this up. Hang on a second. He basically says, "Only if you don't need more power than you already have could you possibly consider politics a form of consumption from the couch rather than a domain of goals and strategies." He's basically saying these white, college-educated, liberal Democrats really don't have any unmet needs. And so for them, and this is another what I thought was a really sharp insight, he said political hobbyism is to public affairs what watching SportsCenter on ESPN is to playing football.
Yeah, and I've never met the guy, and I thoroughly despise him because
the author of this article.
No, hang on. Yes, not because he has a different political opinion than me on a bunch of different political issues, but because unless I completely misunderstand the guy, and this wouldn't be the first time, he's basically arguing that politics is like breathing. You should just get on with it. Everybody should be political all the time. And if you don't actually go out and act on political convictions and only just talk about them and then vote, during elections, that means you're not a citizen. You're a hobbyist. You're somebody who just.
I think the second part of that he would agree with. I don't think he thinks everybody should be engaged in politics all the time. But I think what he's saying is there are a lot of people who think that they are very involved in politics, but only do so as a sport or a hobby for them. They're not really engaged. And he gives examples of people who were fighting for more rights for blacks or Latinos, or meeting with their congressmen or gathering in groups.
I don't care. What you do get out of this, maybe this will put it a little clearer. This kind of tone and this kind of tone is the tone that you hear from professionals, usually professional scientists, when amateurs start to make some kind of a inroad or perhaps they make a discovery or something. This is the kind of tone you hear from professional archaeologists who had a huge problem with using LiDAR, laser radar, essentially, to map the Brazilian jungles. It's not real archaeology. And just because they discovered a city, that doesn't mean anything. The city was always there. And it's this kind of elitist temper tantrum where basically they're saying, listen, I know what's going on, and you people who are just talking about it don't. I not only know what's going on, I'm actually doing something about it. So why don't you just butt out of the important stuff of politics and leave it to the professionals? And that's what I despise about this guy. This guy is a guy who puts politics above everything. When he says that you could be working harder, he says the only reason that you wouldn't be working harder is because you have enough power. He's talking about politics as power. He's not talking about politics as governance. He's not talking about politics as a simple execution of things like who's going to pave the roads. He's talking about power over other people's lives. That's what power is in the political sense.
I believe he's actually author of a book called Politics is Power.
Okay, great. So now we've got yet another power-hungry left-wing lunatic who's out there castigating other left-wing lunatics for wasting their time talking about politics when they should be out there trying to amass more power so they can tell other people what to do. People like this are the cornerstone of tyranny. This kind of mindset is absolutely indistinguishable from many of the writings of people who I know a little bit about anyway, and that would be Lenin and Trotsky, both of whom, not Stalin, however. Stalin didn't have to complain about power. Stalin just went up and killed people, and that's next on the list usually. But Trotsky and Lenin both had this sense that, we can't, yes, we're going to call it the workers' paradise. And yes, we're going to say it's the dictatorship of the proletariat, but the proletariat's a bunch of idiots. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Thank God that we intellectuals are here to raise these poor people up from their miserable status. And so in order to cover the fact that we want all the power of telling other people what to do all the time, we're going to say we're doing it for the proletariat, that we're the vanguard of the proletariat. When in point of fact, it's exactly the same thing. It is an elitist intellectual who is complaining that he's not getting as much power as he wants and looking across the spectrum for people to blame or influence for this. The only people he seems to be able to come up with are white liberals. Is this guy a white liberal?
That's not clear. There's no picture of him on the article that I saw. But
because it would be a nice chance to demonize white people as well, and that's another part of the ongoing media narrative. But I don't know, and I don't really care, so we're just going to put on whatever he put in the article.
Well, and it must be pointed out that he is an associate professor of political science writing articles and books. And so one would assume he spends a great deal of time actively engaged in doing the kind of debate and discussion and consumption of news that he is decrying here. And I don't know that the guy doesn't go down, to the local political rally or gathering or get together with empowerment groups in his community. But that's his beef, basically. he says one of the things that happens is that these folks who are political hobbyists, and again, he's largely
what does that mean? What does that mean? He's talking about a citizen, in other words, right? A citizen.
He's talking about people, his terminology, and it's clearly a backslap at them, that they're political hobbyists because they read news, they like to get on social media and discuss and debate. They may occasionally, throw a $5 bill at a political candidate they like, but for the most part, they don't have any active engagement at the local level.
Yeah, all they do is vote.
One of his complaints is that they are hyper-focused on national news and really pay very little attention to what's going on in the local communities. And he says what happens is when you get engaged face-to-face in political organizations, and he doesn't just mean partisan like parties, but political organizations, he says rather than cultivating patience and empathy, which is what you have to do if you're trying to persuade people face to face to do something. He said instead they're just stoking rage and seeking instant gratification without any real impact.
Notice that, because I agree with that assessment, notice it's not that that they're stoking rage. That's the problem. It's the problem that they're generating all this useful rage and they're not getting any power out of it. That's the problem. Look, if the guy is basically making the case that rich white liberal intellectuals are a bunch of, we'll just say wankers, then you're not going to get any argument from me about this. I've said before, I'll say it again, intellectualism is intelligence that's been left in the back of the fridge for 7 months. That's what intellectualism is. It's a dog constantly chasing its own tail, going faster and faster and faster in an attempt to bite whoever's intruding on his territory. It's the source of virtually all of the trouble that we get into on a political scale, certainly since the 20th century and probably before then. And it's not just intellectualism, it's elitism. When somebody talks about this man is presumably he's an American citizen, let's go from that presumption. If he's an American citizen, he has one vote for president. And so do the hobbyists have one vote for president. And everything else is essentially trying to influence other people's votes. But for him to call people who have as much of a vote, and that's all that matters, hobbyists, is for him to say that I am a professional, not a politician, what would you call it?
It's almost like a community organizer or activist.
Yeah, agitator's a better word. But put aside the label. There's clearly, to me, he is saying, I'm a professional in a democracy, and because I'm a professional, I know how to manage things so that I can accumulate as much political power as possible. And to say that, yeah, well, that's because he's a political science professor, is to say the same thing as saying, like, look, I could have been an astronomy professor, but I wouldn't have used astronomy in order to control the minds of the entire population of the United States. You know what I mean? It's one thing to study something, and it's something else to study something in order to get power. And we have a government that and a document that was designed specifically for people like this, to keep people like this from getting their grubby little paws on other people's lives so that they can tell them what to do. And that's what he's really frustrated about. He's frustrated that other Democrats other liberals are not spending more time on the ground putting in money and going around and registering voters so that they can take freedom away from the people who don't want anything to do with this life of politics, where politics is your religion, your hobby, it's your family, it's your everything. It's your oxygen. You can't live without it. All I'll say in closing, at least on this point, is imagine yourself at a cocktail party with this guy. Is there a not only more boring person in the room, is there a more boring person in the country, in the hemisphere? It's one thing to talk politics, but to live politics. And by the way, I think the salient point here is that he's not an actual politician, because actual politicians, no matter what you may think of them, actually do have power. We talk about living in a democratic republic, and as so many people on the right constantly point out, that we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. That's mostly true. But the fact of the matter is that 535 of us live in a democracy on the federal level. 435 representatives and 100 senators do in fact live in a democracy. They vote on the things that affect their own lives. They vote on everything that affects their own lives. The rest of us send those people to that democracy and hope that they're going to do what we want them to do, more or less. And so this guy is complaining about people not putting in enough effort or just, being hobbyists when it comes to politics. And yet he seems to be unwilling to run for political office, which is really the only thing that can actually execute levers of power. And I think the reason he's doing that is because in order to get elected, you have to have people like you.
Final question, Bill. I think that what struck me is I didn't realize until about halfway into the article when he mentioned specifically that these people are predominantly Democrats, I really thought that he was going after Republicans, because the focus on white rather than black or Latino, and that's just kind of a trope that's trotted out by the left and academics. And when he got into the part about the focus on national politics rather than local action, it occurred to me, well, it makes sense for Democrats to want to spend all their time reading and talking about national politics because they would rather push everything up to the national level, so to speak. They would rather have decisions made for the entire country out of Washington, D.C., and
Federal Department of Dog Catching.
Yes, and really the people who ought to be hearing the message that engaging in local activism, community, county, municipality, or state level activity really should be conservatives, because conservatives believe in pushing the power down to the local level. And yet, I'll go to the front of the line as being a guy who, at least since I'm no longer active in local politics, since I moved to a different state, I'm much more engaged in thinking and talking about stuff that happens at the national level than I am locally. I don't really know much about my community or what it needs or what's going on here. And I guess I thought that was like a fair criticism, but I thought he was aiming at me, and he wasn't.
No, he wasn't aiming at you, Scott, because you're a knuckle-dragging mouth breather who lives out in flyover country. You're irredeemable. You're a conservative, and so the argument isn't even aimed at you. You're the obstacle. People like you and me and the people who watch this show are not the people he's trying to reach, because we are the people he's trying to beat. He wants political power in order to suppress what we say and believe. Him trying to recruit us it was kind of like the Confederacy, putting slaves in uniform. It's like one Confederate leader said at the time, if Negroes make good soldiers, then our entire theory of slavery is wrong. And it turns out they do, and it turns out he was wrong. So this guy is not stupid enough, according to his own value system and his own echo chamber, to waste time on people like you and me.
But don't you think it makes some sense for people like me, for example, to, as a conservative who believes in decentralized government, shouldn't there be at least a little balance where we say, you know what, yeah, we can engage and talk about and discuss and debate the national politics, it's important, but we really should carve out some of that time of our political involvement to really be in some tangible local action, because that's where it really should be in a country like this. That's where the focus should be. Yes,
but, the person who is who's running for county commissioner is not walking papers down the hall to indict the President of the United States of America. So national politics is where the celebrityism is. And that's another thing that infests this entire left-wing view, is this idea of fame. Now, I understand this guy's talking about getting more involved in local issues. I'm talking about the people he's criticizing. Of course, they're fascinated with federal politics for the reason you outlined, which is that they want everything pushed up, but also to the degree that they're hobbyists. I find that term absolutely, unbelievably condescending and informative. They're not citizens. talking about what they want to talk about. They're inefficient cogs in the political machine. And we're going to write this article. I'm going to write this article to see if I can shame some of them into action to generate a little more power. So I don't know what to say about a guy like this, other than I despise the philosophy, and I have a strong feeling, given a few things that he said that are antithetical to the things I believe in. Not only would I not enjoy his company very much in a cocktail party, but who would? I mean, when you get right down to it, and to some degree this exists on the right as well, but it's nothing like equal, because politics is not important to individualists, and it's not important to conservatives in the way it is to liberals. It's everything to them. But anybody who does nothing but talk politics, and especially from up in the snowy heights of wisdom and morality, where this guy's obviously coming from, are the most boring people in the world. They're absolutely appalling. The only thing they know how to talk about are the kind of things that get people to pull knives on each other. And this attitude towards the citizenry of the United States is so unbelievably damaging and so clear. It's so clear to me anyway in this guy that this is how the left thinks about people and politics, which is why it's an interesting example, and I'm glad you brought it to the show. It basically says that left-wing intellectuals don't believe in democracy in the sense of, I've got one vote, but there's 300 million other people out there, and 300 million people are probably smarter than me. So let's see what the 300 million decides. That's not where he's coming from. He's coming from a position of these idiots aren't voting the way they should vote because they're spending too much time talking and not enough time actually organizing. And so I'm going to try and motivate them with this stinging rebuke of their false virtue signaling. That part is true, but the part about doing this for the health of the democracy or the country is just plain wrong. It's in order to get power.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be some talk of politics and news on our 3-day cruise, May 15th through the 18th, aboard the Royal Caribbean Navigator of the Seas. But what I'm really looking forward to is just hanging out with a lot of nice people, the kind of people who are friends and fans of this program, the people who are members at BillWhittle.com. And I know there's going to be a lot of laughter and joy and just relaxation and fun at that. If you're not yet signed up for that, I just saw another person on our website today who was excited to report that she had just signed up, booked her cabin. You can do that by going to our website and clicking on the big boat. That should take you there. We'll also provide a link in the description below so that you can get to that BillWhittleCruise.com website and reserve your cabin as well. We're grateful to the members at BillWhittle.com and our buddies over at Patreon.com/BillWhittle for providing funding for this enterprise. And we look forward to seeing you on a cruise to the Bahamas out of the port of Miami in May. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.